At 5:30 local time, 3 Ukrainian Sea Baby naval drones were already committed to a one-way mission. 90 minutes earlier, they had shut down every transmitter, every beacon, every signal that could betray them. They ran dark across the Black Sea, heading toward a Russian-controlled oil platform that had been turned from an industrial relic into a surveillance outpost, and they had no idea they were already being hunted. 8 kilometers away, a Russian Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter had picked them up on patrol. In exactly 30 minutes, what began as a routine drone strike would turn into one of the most devastating attacks on Russian Black Sea infrastructure. The Ka-52 banked hard and dove through the morning clouds. For a moment, the world was gray, then the cloud broke and the sea snapped into view. At 8 kilometers, the pilot caught his first clean glimpse of the targets. 3 gray shapes, cutting 3 white wakes, moving fast over black water. The IFF interrogator returned nothing. No friendly Russian frequency. No recognized profile in the aircraft's recognition charts. These were unknown surface contacts approaching Russian-occupied waters at attack speed. The pilot rolled the Alligator hard left, collective down, nose over. The helicopter dropped from 600 meters to 80 in under 30 seconds, accelerating past 260 kilometers per hour. The gunner swung his targeting camera onto the drones and zoomed in for a tighter shot. The Sea Baby formation was tight, a column, 30 meters between hulls, a spacing chosen to minimize detection and simplify navigation. The pilot pushed lower, down to 40 meters altitude, trading altitude for weapons accuracy. At that height, speed felt different. The water rushed by so fast it created the illusion of even greater velocity. The closing distance collapsed. The engagement stopped being about distance and started being about seconds. He rolled the pylon switch to cannon and armed the Shipunov 30mm. The plan was simple. 1 pass, 1 long burst, 3 drones. Then climb and return to patrol. He'd done it before. But this time was different. The gunner thumbed the trigger. The Alligator's nose yawed slightly as the cannon spooled up, and a stream of 30mm high-explosive incendiary rounds tore forward. Tracers walked downrange in a straight line. They slammed into the water and erupted into geysers of spray. On the drone cameras, the ocean turned into a forest of vertical white spikes. The lead operator reacted instantly. He snapped the control stick left, then right, then hard left again. The column broke. The formation scattered. 3 drones forced 3 different aim problems. This was the moment the engagement went wrong. This was the scenario Russian doctrine hates. A fast, low, irregular target, close enough to see, too small to lock, big enough to threaten, too quick to finish. The Ka-52 systems were built to track tanks, not jet skis with bombs. They were designed for heat and mass, for predictable silhouettes, for targets that look like targets. A T-72 turret at 8 kilometers is easy for an auto-tracker. A tank has sharp corners, heavy shadows, large metal surfaces the computer can match from frame to frame. That is how the crosshair stays glued to a target. A Sea Baby at 2 kilometers gave the software almost nothing. It filled only a few pixels on the gunner's display, a small shape bouncing on relentless water. Every time the system tried to follow the bow, white spray from the wake washed out the image and broke the lock. The gunner had to ride the sight manually. Tiny thumb movements, constant correction, chasing a target that jinked 10 degrees off course every few seconds. At 260 kilometers per hour, a 1-degree error meant missing by tens of meters. The Arbalay 52 radar was not much help. It was built to track aircraft and large vehicles, not a tiny hull buried in wave reflections. Near the surface, the radar picture collapsed into scattered flashes of sea return. Too much clutter, too much noise, not enough target. The radar confirmed something was there. 3 somethings at 4.5 kilometers, but it could not provide a fire control quality solution on any of them. The gunner tightened his burst pattern, shortening it to controlled 2-second pulses. He needed to conserve ammunition. He needed to keep recoil manageable. He needed to keep the helicopter from drifting offline under the cannon's shove. Rounds stitched closer. The pilot pulled up to reset. He leveled off for a moment, giving the gunner a steadier platform and buying himself a few seconds of air and time. This shouldn't have been happening. On paper, the Ka-52 had every advantage. In reality, those advantages were starting to evaporate. The Ka-52 wasn't just another Russian helicopter. It was designed to dominate ground armor. Its strength came from brute mechanical muscle, roughly 4,800 combined horsepower driving twin coaxial rotors. Those coaxial blades let it knife through turns tighter than most NATO helicopters could manage. Its flight computer stabilized those counter-rotating rotors with a digital autopilot. It could hold a hover in 40-knot winds. It could keep the nose pinned to a tank column, even while the pilot yanked the collective around. But all of that power came with assumptions about the battlefield. The Ka-52's fire control brain was tuned for thermal mass, for angular geometry, for predictable movement, the kind of signatures tanks, APCS, and infantry fighting vehicles produce without trying. The Sea Baby had none of that. The drone's electric motors barely warmed above the surrounding water, giving the Ka-52 almost nothing to track in infrared. And their low silhouette, only 40 to 50 centimeters above the surface, put them inside the helicopter's worst engagement geometry. Every system on the Ka-52 was optimized for big targets, not something that barely existed in sensor space. Each Sea Baby you see here was about 5.5 meters long, a hardened fiberglass hull with a radar cross-section scarcely bigger than drifting debris. With a draft of less than half a meter, most of the hull sat inside the layer of wave clutter that maritime radar struggles to see into. Two 70 to 80 kilowatt electric motors drove a ducted propulsor. Quiet, fast, 35 to 40 knots on a sprint. No hot exhaust plume, no obvious thermal bloom. A compact navigation mast held a dual-band line-of-sight antenna, a forward EO/IR camera, and a GPS receiver tied to a ring laser inertial navigation unit that tracked rotation down to 0.001 degrees. Even under heavy jamming, the onboard computer could hold a heading with impressive precision. And under the deck sat a sealed internal module with its own power bus, something the helicopter crew couldn't see, something they couldn't account for, something that would matter later when the platform tried to defend itself. All three drones were still moving east. Now the Ka-52 needed more than a gun. They were leaving the cannon's engagement envelope. The distance was widening. The angles were degrading. He had to bring out the missile. The pilot climbed to 200 meters, rolling into a wider arc to set up missile geometry. The gunner switched the weapons panel to Vikhr 1, the beam-riding anti-armor missile that could just as easily shred a fast boat if it could maintain line of sight. On paper, the missile didn't care whether the target had tracks, wheels, or a propeller. In practice, the engagement envelope assumed something bigger than a fiberglass robot. The Shkval crosshair found the lead Sea Baby again. The gunner heard the steady tone in his headset. He felt the aircraft settle as the pilot tried to give him as smooth a platform as possible. Range, 3.2 kilometers. Closing speed, just under 100 meters per second combined. That gave them barely 30 seconds between launch and overflight. Enough on a test range. Not much over gray water with a target that treated a straight line as a suggestion. He squeezed the launch trigger. The Vikhr dropped from the rail, motor firing a second later. From the drone operator's perspective, it looked like a bright point accelerating across the sky. A ruler straight line aimed at their hull. The Sea Baby's evasion routine wasn't random. Operators had learned what sometimes broke laser-guided and beam-riding weapons. Short, sudden course changes at irregular intervals. Never the same timing twice. Just enough to drag the aim point off a hull that barely existed in the sensor's world to begin with. The Vikhr tried to ride the laser cage, a narrow box of light the missile uses to guide itself. On calm terrain, it works. On open water, the beam jumps with every swell. The missile passed within a few meters of the Sea Baby, close enough to throw spray across its deck, then detonated in open water. The shock wave rocked the drone, but its hull and internal mounting tolerated more damage than its shape suggested. For the crew, the frustrating part was that nothing was technically wrong. The helicopter was flying, the cannon was firing, the radar was running. The missile had launched exactly as designed, but design is not the same as reality. And reality out here was wave tops and spray, and targets that refused to behave. The formation had scattered under fire, but all three hulls were still moving east, the gunner's display filled with blooming heat and foam from the blast mist. For a moment, the contacts were lost in glare and spray. When the sensors cleared, he saw the Sea Babies spread wider than before, each on its own path, all still converging toward the same bearing. He checked remaining missiles, checked ammunition, checked fuel. They couldn't stay, not longer, not out here. He keyed the radio, tasting defeat. Sevastopol Control, Pelican 4. 3 surface contacts still active, continuing southeast at 40 knots, position 35 kilometers northwest of Sevastopol, unable to prosecute further, returning to base. The response crackled with frustration. Understood. Pelican 4, passing to Zaslan. They'll be ready. The 3 Sea Babies leveled into a loose line abreast and kept running dark across the western Black Sea. In less than half an hour, those same gray hulls would be closing in on the platform. But now the Russians were ready, or they believed they were. As the drones closed with the platform, their operators still couldn't see it, but the Russians had bolted an electronic warfare suite onto the structure to give it the semblance of protection against drones. The only problem was this: that system was about as useful as an umbrella in a swimming pool. The platform's Pole 21 system wasn't much to look at. 4 antenna modules mounted on the platform's legs, each no bigger than a shoebox, connected to a control unit in the equipment room that looked like a 1990s server rack. Allegedly, Pole 21 could deny GPS navigation for 25 kilometers in every direction. Anything relying on satellite positioning should go blind. In theory, that should stop GPS-guided drones cold. In theory. The EW operator had been monitoring his screens for 6 hours straight when the Sea Babies approached to 15 kilometers. His eyes were dry, his coffee was cold, and the screen had become his entire world. Pole 21 was already broadcasting 100 watts of noise centered on the GPS bands, power enough to drown out satellite signals arriving around negative 160 decibels W, whispers from space competing with a bullhorn. His display showed the jamming bubble, a perfect green circle on the map. Anything inside should be navigationally helpless. Right on schedule, the lead Sea Baby's GPS receiver flickered off at 14 kilometers. 9 satellite contacts vanished from the operator's screen back in Odessa. But in that final second before signal loss, the drone's computer grabbed one last position fix. This became the 0 point for everything that followed. The drone didn't stop. It didn't circle. It kept coming. Now the Sea Baby navigated the way sailors did before satellites. Dead reckoning from a known position. 3 ring laser gyroscopes, each the size of a hockey puck, tracked every rotation down to 0.001 degrees. The onboard computer did the math 30 times per second. Started here. Moved this direction at this speed for this long. Therefore, now here. Back in Odessa, the operator watched his navigation display change. The solid green line showing GPS track turned into a dotted yellow estimate. Numbers in the corner showed accumulated error. 10 meters after 1 minute, 25 after 2 minutes. By the time they reached the platform, dead reckoning would be off by maybe 150 meters. Except the platform was about 100 meters wide and lit up like Vegas. Close enough for government work, but they weren't relying on dead reckoning alone. That would have been stupid. The Sea Baby's receiver could also monitor GLONASS, Russia's own GPS system, on frequencies Pole 21 wasn't touching. 1602 megahertz, 1246 megahertz. Jamming those would blind every Russian unit within 25 kilometers, including the platform's own helicopters. So GLONASS stayed alive. The GLONASS signal was weaker, only 4 satellites visible instead of GPS's 9. Position accuracy degraded to about 20 meters instead of 2, but 20 meters was better than accumulating error. The operator's screen showed both tracks. The dotted yellow dead reckoning estimate, and a fuzzy red line from GLONASS. When they diverged by more than 50 meters, he trusted GLONASS. When GLONASS dropped to 3 satellites and lost position, he trusted dead reckoning. Together, they kept him on target. The Russian EW operator leaned forward, confusion replacing confidence. His jamming was strong. Total GPS denial verified across L-band. Yet the surface track showed 3 contacts maintaining course. Speed, never wavering. They should be lost. They should be circling. They should be dead in the water. What he didn't know was that at 8 kilometers, everything changed again. The lead Sea Baby's camera could now see the platform clearly in the morning light. The operator in Odessa switched to visual navigation using the platform itself as a reference point. Navigation lights, red on port, green on starboard, white floods on the helipad, steel shapes and shadows that do not lie. The camera's field of view was 68 degrees horizontal. At 8 kilometers, the platform filled about 12 degrees of that view. It grew larger every second, like judging distance to a car by how much of your windshield it fills. Meanwhile, Pole 21 was cooking itself to oblivion. Salt air had been eating the amplifier since installation day. The cooling fans were clogged with crystallized salt that formed faster than anyone could clean it. The system temperature climbed past 70 degrees Celsius, past 75. At 80, thermal protection should have kicked in, but the operator had disabled it. Orders from above: maintain jamming no matter what. At 82 degrees, things went wrong in the worst way possible. Amplifier number 3 didn't fail gracefully. It went out kicking and screaming. It sent 300 volts through circuits designed for 50. The surge protection fired, saving the other units, but 1/4 of the jamming power vanished instantly. The coverage pattern warped from a circle into a 3-leaf clover, and by accident, or Ukrainian intelligence, the Sea Babies were approaching through the gap between the leaves, where jamming power dropped by about 15 decibels, the difference between a shout and a whisper. This was the moment the trailing Sea Babies revealed their surprise. Pneumatic tubes snapped open, latches popped, compressed gas hissed. 8 FPV racing drones launched into the morning air, props already spinning. These didn't need GPS, they didn't need GLONASS, they didn't need satellites at all. They navigated purely by video feed. Operators seeing what the drone saw, flying it like a video game toward a platform that now filled their cameras. Pole 21 might as well have been jamming smoke signals. The Russian EW operator watched 8 new contacts appear on his screen, climbing away from the sea surface. He knew exactly what they were, and he knew the Pole 21 couldn't stop them. The PKM gunners on deck were about to earn their combat pay the hard way. The Special Forces Sergeant manning the North Tower PKM had experience. He'd seen drone attacks before, commercial quadcopters dropping hand grenades, but these moved different, purposeful, fast, like they knew exactly where the soft spots were. He traversed the PKM and opened fire at 500 meters. The mathematics of hitting a racing drone was not much better than the odds that an email from a Nigerian prince is real, but that didn't stop him. The gun chewed through a 200-round belt in 18 seconds. The barrel glowed cherry red. After 600 continuous rounds, rifling starts melting. Accuracy goes from maybe to forget it. Before it even got that far, the FPVs were already splitting. 3 high at 200 meters, 2 low below deck level, 3 more baiting the gunners at deck height. Every gunner picked his own target. It wasn't coordinated fire, it was panic fire. Each burst was a guess. Each tracer was a prayer. Tracers crisscrossed the air in a frantic light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so useless. The FPVs flew through unfazed. The first racing quad found the FK2 radar array. 300 grams of RDX turned the dish into abstract art. Millions of rubles of electronics crumpled like a soda can. The second slammed into the satellite uplink dish, cutting the platform's primary communications back to Sevastopol. The third found a PKM position. The explosion was small, but it was enough to destroy it. 2 more hit the crew quarters windows in sequence, starting fires that would burn uncontrolled, small explosions, but everywhere at once. And that was the point. They were keeping every defender busy with his own crisis. Through all this chaos, the lead Sea Baby kept coming. It plowed into one of the support stanchions at 35 knots. The explosion was massive, 2,000 kilograms of RDX detonating against steel. The entire platform shuddered. When the smoke cleared, the leg was still standing. Damaged, shaken, but standing. They still needed a second Sea Baby to finish it. Then, just as the second Sea Baby closed to 200 meters, an RPG team got into position. The shooter shouldered an RPG-7. The optical sight found center mass, a gray rectangle bouncing through swells. Breathe, hold, squeeze, whoosh. The rocket accelerated to about 300 meters per second. The PG-7VL warhead could punch through roughly 500 millimeters of armor. It should have turned a fiberglass drone into confetti. The shaped charge detonated against the water a few meters from the Sea Baby's starboard side. When the spray cleared, everyone expected debris. The drone was still there, still moving. It was listing badly, deck awash, crawling at 2 knots, but moving. Here is what the Russians didn't know. Ukrainian engineers had learned from every previous failure. Every drone that almost made it taught them something. The warhead, 2,000 kilograms of military-grade RDX, sat in a steel tube below the waterline. Around it were many millimeters of AR-500 armor plate. The hull above was sacrificial. 5 watertight compartments, crumple zones between them. The RPG had done exactly what it was designed to do. It punched through the outer hull, flooded one compartment, knocked out the main motor. The drone looked finished, but the backup motor, a crude unit in the stern with its own battery, kept turning. 2 knots, walking speed. Speed didn't matter. The finish line was 50 meters away. The defenders threw everything at it. PKM rounds struck the water around the drone. A K-74 rifles joined in. Their 5.45 millimeter bullets were as useful as spitballs against steel, built to survive shaped charges. Another RPG went wide. The shooter rushed. Fear shook the sight. The rocket detonated well ahead of the target. The Sea Baby crawled forward. Its cracked camera showed the platform growing larger. The operator held course using the platform's own navigation lights as reference. Then contact. The explosion lifted the platform's northwest corner. 2,000 kilograms of RDX in direct contact with a support stanchion. The steel leg, about 20 inches in diameter, rated for 10,000 tons of vertical load, folded like a wet paper bag. The platform listed 8 degrees, then 10. Alarms shrieked in frequencies that bypassed ears and hit spines. Soviet engineers in 1987 had designed these platforms to survive single-point failure. 1 bomb, 1 accident, 1 bad day. Their computers, running on processors weaker than a modern calculator, never modeled coordinated attacks on multiple load-bearing members. The K-braces between legs, meant to share weight like good communists, now shared destruction. They transmitted forces the structure was never meant to handle. They turned localized damage into systemic failure. 15 degrees, 18, 20. The center of gravity, normally centered between 4 legs like a table, shifted past the tipping point. The ballast system, capable of handling 5 degrees by pumping water between tanks, screamed pump alarms as it tried to fight physics. This is where engineering meets reality. Steel can bend, bolts can shear, welds can tear, and water does not care what a blueprint promised. Physics won, and somewhere in Moscow, generals stared at satellite photos of their unsinkable platform. Now a wreck, now a navigation hazard. And they wondered how they had lost the Black Sea to a nation that doesn't even have a navy. Bye for now.